All right, welcome everybody to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about working towards your new year project management, meaning what do we need to do to kind of ensure that next year's use of Workamajig in terms of PM and other things will be up to par. And so I created this little checklist here that we can kind of review for today's meeting. So if you do have questions along the way, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A form. I'm not sure what options might be available to you, but feel free to pop questions in there and I will answer them when the time seems appropriate. But for now, I'll just kind of run through our list here. Thank you everyone for joining. All right, let's kick it off with our year-end checklist that I've created. So a big thing to kind of consider when the year is changing over is planning for New Year's workflows. And a good place to start is when we're talking about labor. So we have our labor rates. So we have our default services in the system and all that, and I'm sure a lot of you have kind of customized that and made them your own. So if we kind of need to adjust that for the new year, seeing if things have changed, rates have changed, we can always kind of revisit that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into the main menu up here, and I'm going to open up the admin manager. I'm going to go to our system setup. Let's open that up in a new tab there. Within our system setup, under the billing options, if I scroll down, there's our services and service rate sheets. So this is a good time to kind of start reviewing this for the new year. Now there is a lot of timing that might go into this. So this is not something you might do, preparing now, or you might consider, hey, I'm going to, plan out all the changes I'm going to make, and I'm going to institute that on the first of the year. Either way you do it, just kind of consider some other things that we'll talk about in a moment here. But for now, I'm just going to go into our list of services. And so in our service list, again, these are the default services. I did rename one called Admin Manager, and I just called it non-billable. I will kind of highlight why I did that and why I kind of prefer that. But ultimately, this list of services is what your employees will see when they're entering time. So you could just have a whole list of services. Whatever you do, this is what that list should be. So don't just leave the default services in place for your duration of Workamajig. I would say update this list to make it current. Have it show what it is you do. If there are services that you don't need, you can just simply make them inactive, and that way they drop off this list. I don't recommend deleting things. I always just say just make it inactive. That way people can't pick it going forward, and then you don't have to deal with any potential issues if you try to delete something that has already been used. It's virtually impossible to delete it at that point. So you have to make it inactive. But if you need to add more services, whatever you need to do, make this list current. Along with that is your hourly rate. So when we're talking about services, we're talking about labor and billable time. So you do want this rate to be more accurate for your area. So for example, let's say, this year our rates are going up, $10 an hour or service, however you want to kind of define that. So you can just simply click in here and, update the hourly rate of this service. Now, like I was saying, there is a bit of timing that comes along with this. So if I update the rate of my service to, let's say, $135 an hour, perfect. All I've done is update the setup of the rate of the service. Now that does not change the service rate of any unbilled time entry in the system. That is a little bit different. So now if people do put time to account management starting now, it will have a billable rate of $135 an hour. So that's kind of an interesting timing situation of, well, I don't want that to happen until the new year. Okay, well then you might want to leave that at 125 for now, but then on January 1st, come in here and update all the rates to what they should be for the new year. Now that's one way you can kind of handle the changing over of your labor rates on a yearly basis, but that's if you're pulling from your services. We know that when we are creating projects, there is an option in the project to say get rate from, and the default is get rate from your services list here. So updating your rates here, once a year, works great. But if you have specific situations, let's say, a project that was created in 2023, even though it's running into 2024, the rates of that project need to stay the same. They can't change because we have to honor the rates in which that project was created within. So you can still update your services to your current rates just so you have that in place. However, in a situation where you need projects that are running in 2024 with different rates for the same client, then we would kind of utilize what we call service rate sheets. So with a service rate sheet, you might create a rate sheet. Let's create a new rate sheet here, and let's call this our 2023 rates. So imagine we were using a rate sheet for last year, and this has just pulled in all of the current rates that are in our services. So if I were to update our services and their rates, I could come in here and make a new rate sheet and call it, 2024. And that would pull in whatever the rates are that I just added into our services. In this case, I'm just going to take this rate sheet, and I have some other options here after the fact. I can say, let me make an adjustment. So when I apply an adjustment here, I'm going to say our rates are going up 10%. So I'm going to adjust my percentage here as 110%, apply my adjustment, and now everything is 10% higher. So we've just increased the rate sheet for 2024 by 10%. So that's one way you can kind of create rate sheets each year. And then the beauty of that is, all the projects we created in 2023 will be using this rate sheet for its rates. And then going forward, all the projects we create in 2024 will use this rate sheet for its rates. So that way you can have a rate sheet per year that will adhere to those rates, and you have the ability to kind of go back and say, hey, what was our rates in that year? So there are some benefits to using rate sheets in this way versus continually to update your services themselves. Now, that's always dependent on how you utilize Workamajig and how you set up projects. But this is kind of a way I like to do it. I like to create the rate sheets per year. That way we have a little bit more control and that kind of thing. Plus, if you need to create rate sheets per client, then we would do a similar thing. You'd kind of take that rate sheet. I believe you can even, I thought you could copy it, but anyway, you could create a new rate sheet, put the client's name in here, and you can go to the client record and you can say, okay, this is that client's rate sheet. Now, again, this is something that you might need to do across the board. So you might need to update your clients once 2024 hits, or even prior, just as long as you're not creating any more projects for your clients at that moment. You can apply this rate sheet to all of your clients, and that way in the new year when you create projects, they automatically start pulling the 2024 rate sheet. As a little quick demonstration of that, if I go into my client list here. Oh, I haven't searched anything on this account yet. I'll go into my client Acme, and if I go into my billing defaults, for example, billing defaults, I have the ability to say, sorry, my project defaults, my get labor rate from, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to update all my clients. I'm going to say they're all going to get their labor rates from service rate sheet. I'm going to pull in the 2024 rate sheet, or if I had created a rate sheet specific for this client, I would have put that here as well. And that helps me to say, okay, when I'm creating new projects for this client, apply this rate sheet automatically. So that way the PMs don't necessarily have to think about what rates we're using. We can establish that at a client level. So some clients I have where the finance team, they're the ones that kind of manage the client defaults. The PM team just creates projects and relies on the defaults that have been established. But this is a good way to say, okay, right before the end of the year, let's change everybody's rate sheets to next year's rate sheet. So next year when we create projects, everything is flowing. All right, hope that's kind of a good little way of doing that. Let's back up to our notes here. So again, updating service rates, rate sheets, update the client record with the rates as needed, depending on how you handle that. Now, like I said, there is some timing of this, so I put a little asterisk there. So updating unbilled time to new rates as needed, recalculating labor rates. So what is this talking about? So you might have projects still at the end of the year that you have not billed, and that time may carry over to next year. So depending on what we need to have done, I have some clients where they want to make sure whether the time is billed or not, we have to close it out. We have to mark it as billed, we have to write it off. There's different things you might need to do across the board. But ultimately, what we might need to do is say, okay, if we're updating our rate sheets, maybe things are changing, mid-year. So for example, let me go back to a project over here. I'm just going to grab any of them. Go into my project settings here. Go into my billing options. So again, this one was set to get labor rate from service. So imagine this one was already set with the 2023 rates. So if this project was set for the 2023 rates, that's fine. But let's say, as of the new year, now time entries are going to have to use the new rates on an existing project. So this is one where we're not going to honor last year's rates. Now that we're going to go into 2024, I might need to come in here and update it to the 2024 rates. Okay, great. Again, if I do this, this isn't changing anything yet. All this is doing is saying any new time entries will now use the rates of this rate sheet. So that's where sometimes there's a timing of this. You might say, okay, on the first of the year, I'm going to update all the project settings to use the new rate sheet, for example. But if you have a situation where, okay, anything that has not been billed, including last year's time, I'm going to update all the time to use the current rates. So in the project up here under more, there is recalculate labor rates. What this says is any time entries that are unbilled, I want to recalculate them so they use the current rates that are set here in the project setup. Now, when I click this, I do get one more option. I can say update the rate sheets, via like a custom date range. So maybe you didn't get to this right away at the first of the year, so your timing's a little off. So now I have to kind of backfill things. Well, I can go in here and say, okay, let me change this to a custom date range, and I will pick, I will go back to the first of the year, and I will just, choose some point in the future just to have that placed in there. But ultimately, I can, after the fact, go back in here and recalculate the labor rates for a specific period of time. Now, again, this is only changing what has not been billed. Just want to clarify that. But I do have the ability to pick a certain time frame. Now, had I not done anything, it would have been all, and it just says recalculate everything that is unbilled on this project, regardless of what date it was put in there. So you do have some options to do that. Now, if you do post WIP, you can see there's an option right below here. Hey, recalculate the transactions posted to WIP to adjust for, this recalculation as well. So some neat little functions in there to kind of accumulate for that. Now, this is all just per project. If you have your processes in place, you could go to your project views and say, okay, let me take a look at all my active projects. Here's everything that's active currently. And you can actually do this across the board. I could highlight all my projects that are currently active, and I can recalculate the labor rates across the board. Now, of course, I might want to update what rate sheet we're using. We have so many options here. Let's see, get labor rate from, use this service rate sheet, apply this rate sheet. So I could update every project that's active to, hey, let's use these projects, use this rate sheet, and then that way I'm not having to do it project by project, because some of us may have lots of projects. So we could update the rate sheet, and then we could also recalculate the labor rates across the board for a specific time or just everything that's unbilled. So lots of ways that you can kind of manage that and update and get things current. Last but not least, in this labor section here of kind of managing what we're kind of planning for, update your employees' hourly cost. Now that this may go past what some of my viewers here today are a part of, but we do have the ability in our employee records. So kind of going back into our menu, admin manager, and employees, I can kind of go in here and update our users. And under their accounting section, we have their hourly cost. Now, there's always going to be discussions or debates or different philosophies of what the hourly cost for your employees should be. I always recommend having something in here than nothing. I'd rather see everybody have the same hourly cost than no cost. At least have something in here to really kind of drive profitability and the functionality of those reports. Even if it's not 100% accurate, at least it's going to give you something. So I'm just going to say that for my 2 cents there. Now, but this is a time, again, where you could come in here and say, all right, let me update this user's hourly cost. Maybe people got raises over the new year, so I'm going to update everyone's hourly cost to reflect that. You do have the option as well of updating the previous time entries as well. So keep in mind that this one is a timing situation. So you might want to do this on the first of the year as kind of one of your steps. But again, if you come in after the fact, a month later, oh, hey, I forgot to update everyone's hourly cost. You can still go back in here and update the hourly cost, but you will have to do this, one by one per user at this point. But I can click update, and I can say, update the time entries. So even if they've been billed, you can still update the hourly cost of those time entries. So I could go back in here and say, okay, let me update everything starting with the new year until now. And let's get all of those updated with their new hourly cost. So there is the rate, the billing side, and then you got the cost, which pulls from the labor of the employee. So a couple of items to address there as part of making sure all the labor is up to date and current and ready for the new year. After that, there is this billable summary reports. So all of that updating, all of the time that's been entered prior can play into this report. Now, this report might be more in the finance side potentially, but we do have in our report center. So I'm going to go to everyone. I'm going to open up our report center here. Under it should be project financial reports. You have like your billable summary of hours and dollars. These are reports that can tie into what we call a labor budget. So if you use labor budgets, this is a great way to kind of get that analysis. If you don't use labor budgets, you can still use these reports. But actually at that point, I would say just use the time productivity analysis, because that actually kind of combines those two reports into one. But the time and productivity analysis does not include labor budgets. So if you do use a labor budget, which I'll highlight in a little bit later in today, but if you do use a labor budget, you can include that in this type of report. So this is a report you might run at year end and say, okay, how was everything for last year, the last 12 months? Again, if we have a labor budget, on this test account, I don't have any. I apologize. So I won't be able to actually really show you that. But the labor budget, the idea there is saying, here's how many planned working hours they have for the year. We plan on people being, let's say, 75% billable, because all of that information in the labor budget would play into, how I generate this report. Now I want to summarize my report by month. Let's do it by person. Let's go ahead and run our report. Now there may not be much data in here. Yeah, I don't have too much in here, but I could see, per user, here's all of their, information per month. There's that plan I was talking about. That's that labor budget. So that would be how many billable hours they have for the year is the plan, how many non-billable hours they have for the year is the plan, and then what's the total hours. Total hours would be like, that, what is it, 2080 or something like that. Different ways to kind of come up with the total hours depending on how you want to have your reports run. We recommend including, all of the hours, including PTO hours and all of that as your total hours. But then that way you get kind of this whole more holistic look of, hey, what was their billable percent for the year? This one breaks it down by month. I could just have it one row for the year overall, but this one also subtotals for that year as well down here, which is kind of nice. So you can get kind of a month breakdown, year breakdown. This is like my test site. I haven't really entered a lot of time on here. Apologize. But that's the advantage of this report is you can pull in that kind of labor budget into this view. Now this is kind of the hours summary of it. Back up here, there's a dollars. So again, that takes into what's the billable cost. Billable rate and the employee's hourly cost, and kind of combines that to give you a dollars view as well. So there are some other ways you can kind of run that report. But like I said, if you don't use the labor budgets, then these might not be as viable because it's going to show you extra columns that maybe aren't pertaining to you, like that labor budget and the plan columns. So at that point, I would just use the time productivity analysis. It gives you basically a very similar look, but it just doesn't include the labor budgets. So having all that, you can kind of report on last year's time, get all of the rates, all the cost updated for New Year's time. So just some kind of checklist to have kind of going around that time. All right, moving on to the PM side of the system. So let's start off with what we call like an overhead project for the new year. Now, what I like to do is initially when you start using Workamajig for the first time, I like to kind of help create an overhead project for you. And then that way you can kind of solidify that process and how you want to just copy last year's moving forward. So once you have this process done, it should be more seamless in the future. Let me head back to my projects page here. And we can see here I have an overhead project for 2023, and I label it as such. I'm going to go ahead and open this up and kind of show you what I mean by what's an overhead project. Well, first of all, what we do is we create this project for ourselves. So we want to make sure that we have ourselves as a client in the system. When we have our own client record in the system, I'm going to jump into my project and billing defaults here. So I set myself as an overhead client. And I should have, this is actually a newer option, probably never checked it. But we should check ourselves as an overhead client. What that means is it's going to basically remove any transactions that are put to this client from financial reports and put it into what we call like an overhead bucket. So there are other ways we calculate profitability in our financial reports. So there is this overhead or overhead allocations, if you will, that you'll notice in some of our financial reports, and that's how information for this client would then calculate into that number. Now, to kind of help remove these projects from like the project profit and loss views as well, just make all the new projects be non-billable for yourself for this client. So that's kind of a good way to set up yourself in the system. Again, set up yourself as a client under the billing defaults, make yourself an overhead client. And then that way, when you create projects for yourself, in this case here, I have an overhead project. If I go into the project settings and I go to the accounting tab, it should be flagged as non-billable. Now, there's a couple of other options I checked here, like allow anyone to charge time, don't post to WIP. That just kind of is more like housekeeping type of things, because we don't know how we might want to use this project per se, but we don't want it posting to WIP if we use WIP. We want to make it easy for people to enter time if they're doing it manually, so we can kind of leave it kind of more open. But the project itself, I like to just name it, with the year in it, because we're going to, close this project once the year is over and start a new one. Now, yes, you could just have one project that you never close, that you just keep, dumping all of this, overhead time to, but that can just become a little cumbersome after years and years and years and lots of transactions of time entries being put on here. So I think it's cleaner to create a new project each year. It just helps to make it more obvious, hey, that's the 2023 project I should put my time to instead of 2024. So it just helps it to identify a little better. Now, within this project, I'm going to jump into the schedule here. So in my schedule, I've created some kind of overhead tasks, if you will. We created like administrative, company meetings, vacation time, PTO time, company holiday, however you want to label them. These are going to be all of the tasks that people will put time to in an overhead fashion. Now, you can obviously add more here, if you want to have like, jury duty, bereavement, birthdays, however you want to organize this. But the idea is, to have some foresight into this is when you run like a time analysis report and you want to say, hey, how much PTO did so-and-so take for the year? Okay, well, we want to make sure that we have a task that labels it as such, so it's easy to report on. And then that way, if we always have this task being named the same, for example, meaning if we copy this project, then the task name will copy over as well. We can run reports to say, hey, how much time did people put to this task? Regardless of the service, in this case, for overhead PTO time, we like to base it off the task name to kind of break it up and get some analysis that way. Now, if you notice here on the right-hand side, I've assigned people to these tasks. Now, you don't have to do this. So depending on how you want this project to kind of interact with your system, if you like these tasks to appear in the Users Today creative page, yeah, go ahead and assign them. That way they can see it in their task list and they can just kind of, manage it like any other creative task. But if you do that, one thing I'd probably recommend is you take these tasks and you make them like a low priority, for example. That way they can kind of drop to the bottom of your list. And I don't know if any of you know this, but you actually can customize the priority list now. So I could make a new priority called overhead, so it has a whole different designation. And then that way it can list differently as like a fourth priority in our Today creatives. So there are some different ways you can kind of leverage the priority status now to be more customizable as well in this case. So instead of just having it just be low, you could actually have it be a whole nother status now. All right, just figure out kind of highlight that. Now, again, if you're not wanting this to kind of, I don't want to say invade, if you don't want this to appear in your users today creative page, what you could also do is you could turn off some of these settings. You could say, you know what, let me not schedule this task. And then that way this task would be hidden from the today creative. It wouldn't show up in any kind of scheduling. There would be like no start or end date for this task. We could uncheck the schedule option. But we would just say allow in all timesheets. Now, I've already done this at the project level. I already said, allow in all timesheets at a project level. This is kind of like a task override. So because I've already done that at the project level, this setting is not really having an effect. But ultimately what that means, if I unschedule the task, well, they can't enter time through Today Creative. But if they enter time through a manual timesheet, and anyone will be able to, click on the project dropdown and see this project and task appear. So anyone can put time to this. So just some different ways you can kind of utilize it. If you don't want to assign people, and if you don't want them to see that in the Today Creative, okay, make sure it's allow in all timesheets so everybody can at least access it. Now, another aspect of having these overhead projects is saying, well, if we want users to be able to kind of see how much time they've tracked to this task, well, yeah, we definitely want to keep it scheduled, but maybe we also want to allocate how much time they have, for their PTO for the year. So let's say, hey, they get 2 weeks vacation every year. So I'm going to allocate this user 80 hours. And that way, when they see this task card in the Today Creatives, they'll be able to put time to this and see how much PTO they have remaining. Now, again, that opens up other questions of, well, can other people see how much time they've entered or how much they have allocated? Because some users may have more PTO than others. And, so if we need to keep all of that separate, I have some clients where they go to another level above this. And what they do is they create an overhead project per employee. So that way it's just only that employee is assigned to that project. They're the only ones seeing, the allocations, that information, because at a project level, you can have more security of who can access that project and see information on that project. But that does take you to another level because now you're creating a project per employee and somebody has to now, manage those projects. So somebody does have to see that and manage them. And in sense, you might be recreating these projects every year as well. So if you want to go that extra mile, you can do that. But that's if you don't want to kind of lock down the security a little bit. And again, let your users see their allocation. I'm just going to put it back to 0 for now. Now, if you notice, I didn't assign anybody a service in here. I just put all their names in here. And that's okay. Again, depending on how you're going to use this is up to you. What I have done here is like I mentioned a little bit ago in our service list, I took that admin, manager, whatever service that we have by default, and I just call it non-billable. That way you have one service that everybody knows, okay, that's going to be, that service, and it stands out, and okay, it doesn't necessarily matter, it's not categorized in any way, it's just called non-billable. That service has a rate of 0, and whenever anybody uses it, it's not going to bill anything. So that way, when your users are entering time, I think it stands out a little bit more. And if you see this non-billable time being entered on a billable project, well, that's going to raise obvious questions because, hey, all time should be billable on a billable project. Why are you using that service? Now, again, the users can use that time themselves. So if you don't assign a service, when people go to their Today Creative and log time, their default service will actually populate. So what I like to do is I kind of like to leave things blank. And what I do is in their employee record, I'll jump back to my employee record here. And in there, projects and time, I like to make everyone's default service be non-billable. That way, I can kind of, find out, if you will, if people are putting in time manually, because it's going to default to this service. So if I'm really trying to institute, I want people putting time in using the Today Creative page. I don't want them manually putting time in there. By making people service that non-billable service, then when they're entering time, if they enter time manually or to this, here's my overhead project, for example, company meetings. If I enter my time, notice how my default service populates because I'm not assigned a service. But on all of my creative work, if I add a time entry, it is using the service I'm assigned. So it's kind of a neat way to kind of help your users to put time in correctly, because now we're instituting that, hey, all of your assignments for billable work, if you're entering time this way, everything flows. But if you're putting in time manually, or you're putting in time onto a non-billable task, it's going to put non-billable. So just kind of a neat little way to kind of reinforce good process, if you will. Now, again, that's just my take on it. You might have other ideas or ways you want to do that, and that's perfectly fine too. I'm not saying this is how you have to do things. Just here to give you some ideas. Now, if you set up this overhead project and you love the way it is, and that's just how we're going to work every year, like I said, you can then say, okay, now that we're needing to start up the 2024 project, I'm just going to copy the project number here. This is just OH 2023. When I create my new project, we're going to choose ourselves. So I'm going to pick my company here, and this will be the, let's put in the name, overhead 2024. Oh, I think I actually called it company overhead. There we go. And so when I'm going to copy from another project, where is my, oh, did I change some settings here? Let's see here. No, I'm not requiring it. Hold on. Where is my copy? Oh, I'm sure a lot of you have fallen susceptible to the show more, as I've just demonstrated. So from the add a project, if I'm not seeing some options, scroll down, click on show more, and there we go. I get my copy from. I want to copy from another project, and I want to copy from that overhead 2023. So by instituting this, I got to fill in some other details here. So I put in my client, which is me, give our new overhead project the name, copy from last year's overhead project. I can kind of put in my dates for the new year, 1/1 and 12/31, 2024. Let's go ahead and save that. So now I got my project for the new year. Because I put in those project dates for the year, if I go to the schedule, notice how they're already established for the whole year. 366 days, I guess it's a leap year. But what we have here is because I used the constraint of duration of project, that adheres to the project dates. So I don't have to mess with dates of tasks anymore, because all of these tasks are duration of the project. It's a year-long overhead project. So everything just copied over verbatim. Again, if I had allocations, I could kind of change them if need be, but ultimately I got the same task structure, same task names, same assignments. It's just the durations are for the new year, and this is now ready to go. So now that this is available, just put it into production so everyone can kind of see it, and this project is off and running. And if you notice here in the kind of our Gantt view, we can see the 2023 project has the duration already set for last year, and then we have the new project for the duration of the new year. So it all just kind of aligns, and hopefully everybody knows where to put their time based on when it was. Once that 2023 project is done, everybody's logged their time. I would highly recommend going into the project settings. This might have to be finance that does this, but you go to the accounting tab, and then you're going to want to close that project. So when you try to close a project and you save this, it's gonna ask you to mark all the time as billed. So before I do that, notice there's an option that you can do right below that. So I could say, okay, let me mark all of the unbilled time as billed, and I can actually choose a date. So all the time that's in there, let me just put it to the end of the year, for example, and just update all of that, mark it all as billed, and then I might close my project after that. So just a good way to kind of lock things down so nobody puts time to this old project, and all of that should be good. Now, as far as the timing of when people can enter time, so one last little aspect on this time aspect here, let's jump into our admin manager and our system setup again. And I want to show you some options here in your transaction preferences. So in our preferences here, we can go to our timesheet options, and we could also specify, hey, you know what? I want to put in a lock. Nobody should be entering time prior to this year. So now we do have GL closing dates, that we can lock things down, but we might want to put this in here as well and say, hey, let's lock it down. So no time entries before the specific date. Now that's key, and that's good for the finance people to hear as well that might be on here. When you are doing a GL close date or a time entry close date, again, this is locking it for the date prior, not for the date of. So don't put in 12/31/2023, because then people can technically still put time in or transactions into last year. So you want to put the first of this year to lock down last year. But again, this is more of a global setting, where closing just that overhead project just closes that project. All right, so lots of good stuff to kind of go through here. Now, of course, there's other things to think about here of saying, hey, we want to kind of clean up our data, again, close projects, if there are projects that are out there, and maybe we're not instituting certain processes, hey, let's talk about closing projects, review your system settings, your items, kind of like those services, are the services up to date? Are there purchase items we need to update? What can we improve in terms of our setup that will help make our processes more fluid, so we don't have to keep changing things all the time. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of defaults you can set in the system. You can set up defaults per client. You can set up defaults in your project templates. You can set up defaults at the item level. A lot of descriptions, a lot of different things can be done to really streamline your process, so you're not having to change things or update things constantly. So just doing a lot of review of what's in your system is always a good idea, especially kind of year end or year start. Take a look and see what can we do. Now, as far as like the closing projects as one option, in your reviewing of your projects, you might say, oh, hey, we got some projects that are old. They should be completed. So, for example, I have a lot of clients where all they do is they just change the project status, to completed or final build. And that's great. That helps to kind of take it out of the queue a little bit. However, there are still ways or security rights that can allow people to put time or expenses to completed projects. So there is that functionality that I show in the project settings under accounting. There is this closed option. So if we are not using this option, now might be a good time to kind of consider using that, because this helps to really like lock things down. We can always unclose it, reopen it, and do things, but this helps to kind of do an extra lock, so that way we ensure no financial transactions are going to this project after this time. Now, that doesn't mean you still can't like update things on the project itself, like a conversation or some extra notes, but this closes down the financial side. So no new time or expense entries can be added to that project at that time. In order to close a project, however, there's a blurb here. So the project status has to be an inactive status. The status itself has to not allow time or expenses. All of the transactions have to be billed, marked as billed, or written off. So, we do have to kind of complete the transactions, if you will, at that point in order to close a project. But that helps to kind of, lock it down at that point. Now, of course, this is, at the project level. So you do have the ability to say, hey, I'm going to go into my, again, my project views. I might say, hey, let's look at all of our active projects, however you want to kind of define that. But at the same time, we can say, hey, let's look at all the ones that are in this completed status. Now, I don't have any on this particular instance, unfortunately. They're all in production. But you can imagine, okay, any of them that are put into completed, let's filter and find those. Once I found the projects that, in theory are done, but we haven't closed them yet, well, what we can do is we can run a report like this to find them. And in the report views, I have the ability to update multiple. So kind of like I was doing before with the recalculate labor rates, I can also come in here and find all of our completed projects, and I can update the project fields. And we do have one here for changing the close status. And I can say close them, mark everything as billed as of this date, and put them all into this inactive status of final build. You might want to create a new status called closed if you want even. But ultimately, I can mass close projects instead of doing it one by one. And so that's a great way to kind of lock things out so we don't have anybody putting time into old projects. All right. Let me go back to my notes here, just kind of catch up real quick. Last but not least here, kind of like what we've been describing with the cleaning up of your data, review all your templates, think about workflows. What is it that we do? Have things changed over the years? Where can we improve our process? And again, I always say there's always room for improvement, even if maybe little bits here and there. Definitely go through your system, check out, certain settings. Transaction preferences is a big one. Keep in mind that making changes here changes the system for everyone. So be very mindful. But again, maybe things have changed. Maybe we're going to institute a more streamlined process for creating invoices. So instead of having invoices go to a different approver, hey, we could just make it just whoever is entering the invoice, or just automatically approve things. Let's streamline it even further because maybe we have we're a little bit of a smaller agency, and so the person that does our billing, does our accounting, and also does our websites. So they do all kinds of things. So maybe just make invoices simpler for them because they're the ones creating them and billing them. So just make things automatically approved at that point. So there are ways to streamline our processes at a great level here. Again, going through your item list under that global list, we have, going back to our billing options. So you got your services, again, update your descriptions. Do these services make sense? Is this what we do? As well, under like your purchasing section, you got your purchase items. Okay, what do we typically, outsource, or what are we buying? And then with that, you also have like descriptions. So whenever you're using this item, you can have a description that automatically populates. So that way your users don't have to keep filling those out every time they're creating a PO or a vendor invoice. You just have these descriptions that are already there. So lots of ways you can just kind of have items and different things in your system ready to go. Now, as far as like workflows and your project templates, especially, again, you can kind of find this in your system setup area. So go through your templates and say, hey, do all these templates make sense? Because whatever we see here when we open this up, everybody sees. So does that work? Do we need to make some of these inactive? So if there's things that you don't do anymore, like, okay, well, we don't do a brand identity anymore. So I might open that up, go to the project settings of the template, and I'm going to make it inactive. So by making it inactive, that just hides it from this view. I can always show inactive ones, but it hides it from this view, and also your users won't be able to copy from it anymore when they're creating a new project. So that way it just kind of takes it out of rotation, but it's still there in case you need to bring it back. But at the same time, I would review your templates and just say, okay, let me take a look at my template. Do we have like a file folder structure we want to institute per project? Is there anything that we can have like pre-built, like a spec sheet? Do we need like a deliverables, kind of review process already pre-filtered in here? There's a lot of things you can have that are already preset and ready to go. But really, of course, with anything in Workamajig, it's very project and schedule centric. So you want to go in there and make sure that all of your assignments, all your schedules, work. Because this is going to be the biggest time saver when you're creating a project is your schedule. So whatever you can do to have this kind of pre-made, ready to go, and what I mean by that is you have your tasks, you have your assignments, and I would always say have at least the service and the allocation of time in here. But again, if your services have changed in your system setup, let's say, well, for whatever reason, we don't do graphic design anymore. Well, you're going to need to go into your templates and revise that. The system doesn't know that this service is now inactive, if you will. So there are some instances where you may need to kind of be a little bit more surgical, go into your templates, get things kind of cleaned up. Another area that I hear occasionally is in your templates is the team. In the team, maybe we just remove everybody from the team of the template because we don't need them copying over into the new project. So you don't need to have everybody in the team in a template because they're going to be added as they get assigned to the tasks anyway. So at a template, you can keep it kind of bare, but I would just say, make sure your schedules are in place, make sure everything's ready to go when you create a new project from it. But this is where you're going to see, I think, the most benefit is if you review your templates on a yearly basis, to just kind of review that process of what is it that we do? How can we improve this? How can we make this better? All right, so just figure out, kind of throw some of that out there. Before we move on to the admin and finance, I saw that we got a question up here. Oh, hey, Dion, you said, if I don't see the copy from project option when opening a new project, what setting would I need to update in order for that to be available? Yep. So that was that thing I ran into earlier. Again, everyone's susceptible to it, the show more. So if I'm in there and I'm creating a new project, and if I'm not seeing this copy from option here, again, scroll down and click on show more. That will expand this page to show more options, including I want to copy from another project. It's not a security right. Again, I would need to scroll down to the show more option. Now, I will say it is possible that your admins on your account, there is a system settings of the add a project page, and there is an option here to require that you copy from a template. Now, that doesn't change, being able to copy from another project, but that would make it a requirement that you have to copy from something. So right now, it's not required. But that's always a good option to have, to require it, because that's how Workamajig is designed best to have a process in place. But again, that I would just say that show more is the culprit of that. All right, perfect. You see that in the dropdown? Thank you very much. Oh, we got another question that just came in. Amanda, how would you suggest handling logging of hours on a client with multiple projects? Not sure I understand the question, Amanda. I would say, you should be putting time to each project respectively that you work on. But I'm not sure if I understand the scenario or issue there. When we are assigning people to work on projects, they should be showing up in the Today creatives. So if they are working on multiple projects for a single client, well, they should see the tasks for those individual projects on the Today creative page. So, it's not that they're going to be picking which project to work on. They should be seeing what they've been assigned and just simply work on what they see here. Oh, let's see. Oh, you just added an update, meaning a meeting with a client that involves all projects. Oh, okay. That's interesting. So if you are referring to that, it wasn't necessarily specific time to a single project. You were meeting with the client regarding all projects. Okay. So let's go back real quickly to our, let me just close that. Hang on. If we go back to like the idea of having this like overhead project, for example. So if you need, now I don't necessarily recommend this, but if you need, you could create kind of an overhead, not overhead, but you could create a non-billable project per client. So that way you could have a project per client where you track time for things like, okay, we had a meeting with the client. Okay, we had some new business development with that client. The problem with creating a project like that, however, is you start opening up a repository for your users to just dump time to. And that can lead to kind of long-term issues of people's chargeability, billability. Okay, now we're not billing for all the time that people are entering. So it can kind of be a challenge, but yeah, I have seen it where you create a kind of a non-billable project per client for those types of situations. But again, just keep in mind that, hey, we start opening that up and making it easy for people to put time in somewhere. Your users will find the path of least resistance and start dumping all their time there versus putting their time, to what they're assigned specifically. So just be mindful of that. But yeah, that's one way you can kind of handle that. All right, let's see if we can kind of move on here for a moment. And we have our admin section. So as we're, again, kind of reevaluating, how we have things working for the new year. Again, we can always check to see if there's new features of Workamajig that we could utilize. So a lot of times, if you want to kind of see, what are the new highlights for the year, you got two options. One, shoot us an email. just send an email to support@workamajig.com. That'll go right to your account manager. They can kind of give you an update maybe of some of the highlights for the year, and give you some ideas of what new has been added or changed. If you do that, kind of let us know maybe what you're looking for. Hey, I want to improve, this process. Do you have any ideas? And hey, here's how we do this currently. If you're doing things outside of Workamajig, you've got spreadsheets everywhere, let us know. We would love to try to help figure out a way to get all that into Workamajig so you're not, going out all the time. So some of the features that we have, if you're ever wanting to kind of see a list of what's been added over the year, you can click on your username here in the upper right corner. You can go under the More option, and you can kind of see system messages or release notes. And in the release notes, we highlight a lot of things, of what has been updated in the past year. So you can kind of click on, okay, for December, here's kind of all the notes that are happening. But if there's anything big, we try to kind of highlight those kind of more near the top of all the options here. But if you're looking for something specific, this is kind of a good way to kind of run through it and see, hey, is there anything that kind of stands out, of the last years of updates? I forget if the release notes kind of highlight those a little bit more. Let's see, system messages. Yeah, I got some updates. Oh, that's talking about our server migration. But yeah, November update, we try to highlight kind of, these new betas that have kind of coming out, some different things. So you can kind of read this as well. So we got added more colors to graphs and things like that recently as well. We've been trying to make graphs more fun, easier to use. So, that's always kind of a good way to kind of check what's been added. But at the same time, you can also just email us and set up a meeting and, hey, can you kind of run me through, this list or, things similar to this of what we can do to kind of improve things. A thing I like to note as well, even if you're not necessarily using our calendar function fully, I would highly recommend you always add in your company holidays in the calendar. So kind of more of an admin side of the function, but I would always kind of do a review of this at least once a year. Just kind of go in there, go under your main menu under everyone, open up your calendar, and you're going to want to have an admin that does this. So an admin that would come in here would say, okay, we're going to add in our company holidays for the new year, because if I'm an administrator, I'll have access to what we call our public company meetings calendar. Now, that's the default name of it. You might name it simply company holidays. That's typically what I would rename this calendar to. But ultimately, this calendar can block out scheduling in the entire system. So that has a little bit more power or functionality than just a regular meeting. So when I put a meeting on this calendar, and I want to say, you know what, the first of the year, is a company holiday. So I'm going to make that an all-day meeting. I'm going to make the subject be company holiday for the new year. And again, there's that show more button. And here's another option called blockout. So when I set up a meeting that's all day and it's specifically on this calendar, again, this calendar specifically will function this way. And if I block it out, so when I save that meeting, I may not be viewing it real quick. Let me just make that visible on my calendar here. There we go. So there's the company holiday visible on the calendar. So at the very least, I highly recommend you do this. Put in your company holidays in the Workamajig calendar, if nothing else. But make sure that you put them on the public company meetings blocked out all day. That way, when your users start creating projects in the new year, and they're creating projects in the future, they're going to be able to resource them and plan them better, because now these days are not going to be schedulable days in the schedules of the projects. All the project schedules will bypass this day. So if I had let's say a 2-day task from the 29th, starting on the 29th, it'll now end on the 2nd, because it's going to skip this day because it's a holiday. So that does help to kind of plan ahead for any PM functions that you might have. All right, I see some more questions have come in here. I'll try to answer those in just a moment. I want to get to this finance section and kind of close out my list, and then we'll jump into Q&A. So on the finance side, of course, once everything is kind of good up here, You got your year-end financial reports. I meant to put in year-end process. So what I would actually recommend is going over to our help guide. So simply go to support.workamajig.com. That'll open up our help guide, and you can just type in year-end. And there's even a webinar. If you really want to get in depth, there's even a webinar that you can watch previous that we've done of year-end. But we do have a guide as well, year-end well, there's month-end procedures. We'll open up that one. And so in here, it does talk about year-end process. Now, the year-end process is very much similar to the month-end process, if you will. The only difference with the year-end process is you're just kind of changing the fiscal year or changing some settings at the GL level, like that GL close date. But everything else is already going to be established every month if you're doing it that way. So I would just say run through this guide, make sure that you're doing this process every month or at least once a year, and that would be kind of like your year-end process, if you will. Now, of course, that says once we've closed everything, once we've gotten everything locked down, we've posted everything, we've run all the WIP. Again, read that guide. But after you've done all that, well, then you can kind of start running your year-end financial reports. Now, when we're talking about our year-end financial reports, I'm going to jump back into our report center. So menu, everyone, report center. And you got your financial reports. You got your balance sheet, you got your corporate profit and loss, you got your project profit and loss, client profit and loss. Whatever reports you need to run, they're all here. Now there's a lot of discussion, of course, of well, how do these work? Well, I would say let's save that for another time because that gets very, very detailed. So if you have questions on how these reports function and work and the whys and what's about these types of reports, definitely send your account manager an email and say, hey, let's talk about these reports and how we can kind of improve them and get more information. Now, like I said, we want to keep you in Workamajig as much as we can. So again, if you're doing reports outside of Workamajig, let us know. So we do update a lot of these reports with enhancement requests over the years, just to kind of make sure that everybody can do what they need within the system. But to kind of highlight some new functionality that we've added over the years, if there is some situations where you need to take this data out and manipulate it further than what we can within the system, you do have some options of let me scroll down here. Using our API. Now, the API has a lot of meaning behind it. There's an API where your web developers could, basically hook into your database and kind of, pull data out. But at the same time, you could just, use it more simply and say, hey, let me just take the data that would be in this report and pull it out into a Google spreadsheet. And so I could actually copy this link into a Google spreadsheet. Keep in mind there's a little bit more setup you need to do to make this so it can work, but you could take this and put it into a Google spreadsheet and then do more manipulation over there as well. So we do have lots of other ways and functions of kind of accessing the data for additional use. But that would be kind of running your year-end financial reports. And then, of course, last but not least, hey, what are the goals for the new year? What do we want to achieve next year? What do we want to try to build towards? And I would say a lot of that is going to hinge on really utilizing what we call our financial budgets and labor budgets. Now, those two items specifically are located under the accounting and the Today Accounting page. So once we've been using Workamajig for a year, you can more easily make these types of features in the system. So I'm able to go into our financial budgets, after the year is over, and I can create a new financial budget and say, hey, let's pull the actuals from last year. Now, of course, this is my test site, so there's really nothing in here, but you'd be surprised that you could do this after a year of using Workamajig. Just come in here and say, hey, let's make our 2024 financial budget, because we can use this for comparison and analysis in, let's say, the corporate profit and loss or the client profit and loss. This can pull into a lot of those reports. So I can pull this information in based off of last year's actual data and say, okay, let me make some adjustments. Let me drill into these numbers. Let me make some changes. And you can do a lot more with having data already there versus having to start from scratch. So that's something I would highly recommend is, at least explore this. Again, create a new financial budget based off of last year's actuals. You'd be surprised of what you're going to see. And again, that allows you to get into the report side of Workamajig and use the compare function. Now, one thing I was really hoping to show, but I don't think it's in there just yet, is labor budgets. We have a new function that we were working on adding, where it can kind of auto calculate the monthly totals for you. Currently, when you create a labor budget, you can kind of come in here and say, okay, this is going to be the 2024 budget. The actual hours, I believe it's 2080. I always forget what this number actually is, but I'm going to put in 2080. And like I said, we want to make the target billable be, let's say, 75%. So I can add a labor budget very quickly that breaks it down by user, and I can kind of see everyone's potential target hours, billable hours, non-billable hours for the year, and I can always go in there and kind of update, well, what is that gross calculation going to be as well? I can kind of pull in a lot more information. The one thing right now is that this is just going to take whatever total hours you put in there and just spread it evenly per month. But as we all know, not every month is equal. So if you want to get the month numbers to be correct, you'd have to do a lot of manual finagling here. So we do have an option that's in the works. Hopefully it'll be ready for the January update that will auto calculate the number of working days in each month for you and get that number more correct. But labor budgets, again, by having this in here, you'd be able to utilize those billable summary reports I was showing earlier for comparison. So you can create a labor budget for each year. You can change the target by user and do a lot of analysis that way. But all of that is going to be only visible from the Today Accounting page. Well, that is my presentation for today. I'm going to open up to some Q&A here. But yeah, feel free to email us at Workamajig, so support@workamajig.com with any questions you have to follow up. My name is Roderick Ripley. Feel free to include me in the in those emails if you have praise. If you didn't like today's webinar, use somebody else's name. I'm just kidding. So, all right, let's see what questions we have here in the Q&A. So Ellen asks, if the project schedule template has the service assigned to the task, when I pull that template into the project and the team is already assigned to the project, will it take who that person is on the team and automatically pull that person in as the service they are assigned to? Ooh, great question. So I believe, Ellen, what you are referring to is, let me just open up my project here, for example. Let's see what my schedule, oh, this is a bad schedule. Okay. I don't know if I have one that's that good at the moment. Let me just see. So it's always fun about working with a test site. Okay. Another bad one. I want to get one that has a better schedule in here. Okay, well, these are just my examples from other things I've done. So I'm already assigned with a service in here. So Ellen, if I believe what you're asking for is you can assign people here. I mean, this is getting more into like the PM side of things, but when you're managing your project, you can reassign by service here in the schedule. Sure, I could click in here and put the name of the person I want to reassign, but also from the schedule grid, I can click on highlight all tasks and reassign, and I can say, hey, let me reassign by service. So let me pick account management and let me reassign all of account management to this person. So I can change assignments in the schedule. Now that's more of like a kind of a resource management, possibly trafficking kind of situation. But I think what you're referring to is here in the team of the project, there is a function up here called auto assign. Now there's a lot that goes along with this. So when I click on it, there's a whole blurb you're going to want to read here. Plus we even have a help guide on the whole auto assign function that you might want to research as well. But what this ultimately is going to do is it's going to say, okay, whoever here in the team has a service assigned, note that it'll bring over their default service, but you could always say, hey, this person is going to do copywriting. This person is going to do art direction. So you can kind of go through your team and assign who does what service, and this available service list is based on what's in the schedule. Now, what the auto assign function does is it'll push whoever has a matching service here into that schedule. So since that first task was assigned account management, and if I have two people here that do the same service, it's actually going to split the hours and assign both people. So you might want to go through, and say, you know what, this person doesn't do account management. Let's make sure we have a one-to-one match. So before you do auto assign, you might want to kind of clarify who does what here in the team before you push that into the schedule. Now there is one other aspect, and again, I would research the auto assign function in our help guides, but that ties better into our estimates. Because what that auto assign does is it actually wipes out the assignments in the schedule and repopulates them based off of what's in the approved estimate. So a little bit of a bigger way that it works, but that's potentially, I believe, what you're asking for there. Again, if you got more questions on that, feel free to add it into the chat here or just email support later on. All right, thanks, Ellen. Anonymous says, I am not seeing the get labor rate from option in the change multiple screen in order to mass update the active project service rates. I mean, there might, I don't know if there's any security rights behind the changing the get rate from. There quite possibly could be, so that might be a security issue. I am not sure, unfortunately. But just to kind of reiterate, that was from the projects page. That's right, to do the mass update, we got to go to the project views. So the views can be accessible from the project views here. You can also have that in your global list under views. You can have your project views. You can also make these be favorites. So that's also kind of a neat little thing we've added recently, is you can create favorite views. So here's my favorite views of all projects. But yes, if I have a list of my projects, and if you're saying when you update the project fields, you don't see the get rate from, there it is, kind of near the bottom of the list. So if you're not seeing that, then again, that might be a security, security setting at that point. So, but if you can access this, the change multiple, well, then you're already one step ahead. But if you just don't see that, I would just say maybe send support an email and just see if that's like a security right or what's preventing you from seeing that. All right, thank you for that. Let's see. Ellen, again, is that the same question? Let me see. If the project schedule template has a service assigned. Okay, so I think this is the same question again. Yeah, that's the same question. So yeah, Ellen, if you have more questions on that, yeah, please let me know. Let's see. I think that's the same question again. Let's see, we got one more. Amanda says, is there any way to put time to a campaign? Oh, okay, great, good question. So sort of, I mean, it can report at the campaign level, but we do not put time to campaigns themselves. So a project and a task specifically is where all time is put, so no matter what, time is always put to a task, okay? No matter how you create things, whatever hierarchy you have, time always goes to a task, There's assignments that we can create on tasks to make time entry easier, so that way it integrates with the Today Creative page. But as far as putting time to a campaign directly, no. But if we put time to a task on a project, that project could be linked to a campaign, and this one happens to be. So if we put time to a project on a task of a campaign, all of that information would roll up at the campaign level. So I could say, hey, let me see all the transactions at my campaign level, and I can see all of the time entries on the projects below it. So all the data rolls up in that respect. All right, hopefully that helps answer that question. I'm not seeing any more questions at this time, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. But I appreciate everybody for joining today. If you have any follow-up questions, you want me to send you this list that I have created here, be more than happy to. Just shoot us an email, support@workamajig.com. But I hope you all have a great Christmas, holidays, and New Year. And we'll see you again next time. All right, thank you very much. Take care, everyone.